My name is Netfa Freeman. I'm with Pan-African Community Action. That's a local organization here, at least for right now, because we're Pan-African, that's what means we want to end up all around the world. But we're local, and we're fighting for community-based power in the Washington, D.C. area. And so we always say the struggle, what we're struggling for is not a fight against racism.
Right.
It's a fight for power.
Right.
Kwame Ture used to say, if a white man wants to lynch me, that's his problem. If a white man has the power to lynch me, then that's my problem.
That's right.
So we can't do anything about whatever kind of racist, mentalities and problem things floating around in white people's head, but we can do something about the power, the disposition of power, and that's what we're fighting for. We're a proud member of the Black Alliance for Peace, and one of our main campaigns in Washington, D.C. is community control over police. Now, let's be clear, sometimes we say that people think we're fighting for a review board or oversight. That's not what we fight for. Right. Community control over police is what we fight for. Everything else is redundant. So I'm on the coordinating committee of Black Alliance for Peace as well. Parker, did I say Parker was a member of the Black Alliance for Peace? And with Margaret, we're co-coordinators of the Africa team. And the Africa team leads up our Shutdown AFRICOM campaign, which you heard a little bit about, and I'm going to talk about the Shutdown AFRICOM campaign. But first, I'm going to read what our definition of AFRICOM is. AFRICOM is the acronym for the U.S. Africa Command, a more formalized and coordinated U.S. military presence in Africa to carry out long-term geopolitical strategies for U.S. imperialism on the resource-rich continent. AFRICOM is the recolonization of Africa by the U.S. and is the enforcement of its part in the new scramble for Africa. Under the false guise of combating terrorism and dispensing aid. Today there are 46 various forms of U.S. bases as well as military-to-military relations between 53 out of 54 African countries and the United States. U.S. Special Forces troops now operate in more than a dozen African nations. When AFRICOM started about 10 years ago, the African people on the continent didn't want it.
Right. People
were up in arms. And I think people mentioned it. That was under George W. Bush. In fact, the only country that even entertained, they were trying to find a headquarters for AFRICOM. Now it's in Stuttgart, Germany, because they couldn't find any country except for Liberia is willing to entertain that. But they still ended up, but that's what we call a comprador class. Not the people. The people didn't want it. So they ended up not being there. Right? And then comes Obama. That was in 2008. Right after George Bush, right after they established it, Obama came into office, and next thing you know, the comprador class and all the people, some of the people tripping over their feet trying to, host AFRICOM, right? Or not host it, but inviting the U.S. to come. Ever since Obama came in office up until now, we've seen a 1,900% increase in the presence of U.S. Military bases and presence on the continent of Africa. And one of the things, there was a crazy article that came on not too long ago. It was in the Washington Post. It was this week. It was this week. No, maybe it was last week. The title of it was, Trump says ISIS is defeated, but West Africa, there are fears of extremism will get worse. And if you read the article, it's describing how the leadership and the president of Mali was saying, please don't we have this ISIS problem, these terrorist problems in our country, and if you leave, the military leave, don't stop, we need you over here. Now, this is ridiculously crazy because the problem that they have in the Sahel and Africa in terms of what we call the proliferation of Islamic, was referred to as Islamic extremism, is a direct result of the United States policy in Africa.
Hello.
So they caused it, right? And then they want to, in the comprador class, because the people on the ground never agree with this. I just keep using that word. People don't understand what that means. That's the people who are operating for foreign interests. They're supposed to be of a particular country, but they operate for some other interest in your country. We call them traitors. In South Africa, they call them people who was due a necklace.
Yeah.
People know what the necklace is.
Yeah, the necklace. Bring it back. Bring it
and this was under apartheid South Africa, was what they gave to the traders. They would take a tire and douse it in gasoline and put it around the person and light it on fire. And it was a necklace, and it was for the traders, the people who collaborated with apartheid in South Africa. Right? But anyway, I digress. So anyway, the responsible for the weakened state is the U.S. policy in Iraq and Syria, and what they did in Libya was sort of what we call beating a hornet's nest. And they just, these are the people they supported in Libya, the Islamic extremists, or the people that wanted to take over Libya, and now and also Syria and all that, and now they're all over Africa, and now African leaders are begging the United States to come in and help them with this issue, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. So AFRICOM is posed as this humane military solution for problems that the United States created itself. And we have France, the history of Mali includes France, and now we have to remember history. Malcolm X said of all of the, this is a paraphrase, academic disciplines, history is best qualified to reward all research. It means we can't forget. We got to know what happened. So back when France and during the independence movements in France and Britain and all them, and the United States, when our countries were getting their independence and liberation, these countries were trying to undermine it.
That's right.
At the same time, COINTELPRO was going on here, and they were trying to do everything they could to repress the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement and everything. The FBI had the COINTELPRO program. The CIA was in Africa doing the exact same thing.
That's right.
We got to remember that. How can they come now and pretend to be some benevolent provider of justice and democracy and fighting terrorism? We got to remember that. Sometimes they hoodwink us. And so we have to remember this kind of history. Now the neo-colonialist puppets, the bankrupt comprador class, they could address the problems in their countries, because it's not about Islamic extremism. I mean, when you read the Washington Post article, it admits this is about land and limited resources. It's not just Islam. And the bankrupt comprador class, they could do something with that. They could just not abide by neoliberal policies. They could do some programs that would more equitably distribute resources and land and all that kind of stuff, but they don't want to do that. Right? And of course, they will become targets of the West. That's what they do when you start doing stuff for your people, then they make you a target. And so some people would say, well, that's an excuse. That would be an excuse for the people to say why they can't do anything for their people, but we got leaders that die for our freedom.
Exactly.
If you didn't become in a leadership worthy to stand up for your people and do whatever it takes, what good are you?
That's right.
Malcolm X said the price of freedom is death. Right. So we got to be ready to stand up and fight and die. And if we're talking about a liberation struggle, those who understood the need for armed struggle said, sometimes we got to kill. It's just that cold-blooded, brothers and sisters. That's just the way it is. So now I want to finish this, because I could go off, because now there's talk now, because this is how they confuse us. Always when what comes with military power is the soft power. And they use NGOs and NGOism, some of us talk about, to kind of confuse and muddy the waters. This is what happened since the independence movement, and even in here, NGOism. We'll hear talk about the international community, even the media. What do they mean when they say the international community? They're not talking about the masses of our people. No. When they say, what does the international community want? Now, you have countries like the USAID, U.S. Agency for International Development, and then through AFRICOM, it's called the carrot and the stick method. It'll be the troops providing, little rice and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. Not stuff that's going to help us grow and diversify our crops and our, the things that we need to sustain us, just little crumbs to keep us dependent. And they'll have the military doing it, so that people will say, when we say we gotta pull U.S. out of Africa, they say, but wait a minute. When like the cyclone comes and all that kind of stuff, they're gonna think we need these forces to help us mitigate problems like that. We gotta be, and they'll come to our sisters and brothers who in college and entice us with jobs, U.S. Agency for International Development, and we going on thinking we doing something for our people, and all we doing is facilitate neocolonialism.
That's right.
I mean, and Kwame Nkrumah talks about neocolonialism. He describes it in a book called Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. One of the chapters is called The Machinations of Neocolonialism. He talks about these NGOs and the World Trade Organizations and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. These are the places they come and get us, and we working for them, and we thinking we doing something for our people. We ain't doing nothing but supporting neocolonialism.
That's right now.
I'm sorry, and it's gonna be like that. And I'm not telling you you gotta quit your job if you work for one of them, but at least become revolutionary and give us the information we need. The last few things I want to say is that, and this is another thing that history tells us, it's time, because right now the United States is resorting to more militarism because they're not so much a world power. They're competing with like China. China is the main reason they're trying to increase their militarism, and a lot of things they're doing around the world is because they want to compete with China, and we have to be careful about the propaganda again, because they'll have us always talking about, what about China? So I'm not saying we shouldn't be worried about China, but they'll have us talking about that, and we ain't even talking about AFRICOM. We're not even talking about the United States is doing in Africa, or the militarism in our communities. I almost want to talk about the American descendants of slaves, which seems like a digression. But it's related, because if we think our history and our heritage started at the Middle Passage, then we don't understand our obligation to fight forces like AFRICOM. We won't understand that the 1033 program and AFRICOM are counterparts.
Exactly.
They're counterparts. They're the same thing. We are colonized people right here. We got the same, and it's not an analogy, it's the reality.
Wow.
We got the same relationship in this country to the forces of white supremacy and capitalism and patriarchy as the colonized people do.
That's right.
Colonization is not about the geographical distance, it's about the relationship of power. We have to remember we're colonized. When we start talking about oversight and all that kind of stuff, we ain't never heard no liberation force say, we need a more benevolent occupying force. And they said, we got to get rid of the occupation.
That's right.
That's right. So one, I'm going to end with this. Pan-African Community Action has community control over the police, and it goes in line with the domestic side of our campaign about Africa and getting the U.S. out of Africa and overthrowing AFRICOM. And we want, what we want to say is, not only does there need to be a mass movement in the U.S. to shut down AFRICOM, this mass movement needs to become inseparably bound with the movement that has swept this country to end murderous police brutality against black and brown people. The whole world must begin to see AFRICOM and the militarized police departments as counterparts.
That's right.
No compromise, no retreat. Struggle to win.
That's right.